Hola, hola. Thank you so much for being here on today's show. I have Raylene Hernandez and Alejandra Magaña Gamero, who are the two women behind Latinas Talk Dinero. And I want to first start with Raylene. Raylene, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you guys started this whole Latinas Talk Dinero.
Awesome. Yes, so I'm Raylene. I am born and raised in the South Bay of California, South Bay of the Bay Area. East San Jose in particular is my home. And I feel like for me, beginning Latinas Talk Dinero with Ale and like I think and finding this path was really like a journey of trying to figure it out for ourselves. I think being the first in my family to access education at like a higher education, I think opened up like a different type of conversation about wealth. I remember my first job making like, I think it was like $40,000 a year and realizing I was like, oh my God, I'm rich. Like I'm making more than like my whole household combined. But it also brought so much guilt and responsibility. Because I think for me, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in some way or fashion, um, I'm my retirement plan, my parents' retirement plan, and my grandparents' retirement plan, right? And I think it dawned on me that like, oh, this isn't just like a access to education type thing. This is an access to the ability to build wealth, and that's a responsibility that I hold. And so I think this page was like, okay, like how do I figure this out? And I think in very Latina fashion, like why do it alone? And so I then get to do it with my best friend.
That's
Yeah.
great. Okay, Alejandra, your turn. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to like go in with Raylene on this joint venture.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Mayra. So I'm Alejandra. I go by Ale. I'm born and raised in Southern California. So folks may be wondering how Raylene and I met. But we met as college students at Santa Clara University. Again, I was born and raised in Santa Monica, California, but I'm a proud daughter of Mexican immigrants. And to your question about how all this came together, it was really serendipitously. Like we
Mhm.
didn't come together and say like, hey, let's start a business and like make money from it. If we do make money, beautiful, right? But I say serendipitously because it was really, we came together and said like, hey, let's just share what we're learning. We really wanted to share our knowledge with our community. And we said, hey, like we both speak Spanish and English. Let's share what we're learning in both languages so it can be accessible not only to our friends, but also to family, aunts, uncles, right? Tios, tias, all of that. So we just started sharing content, and over time, people started reaching out and seeing us as the quote unquote experts in this area. And then that's when Raylene and I said, hey, why don't we make something out of this? Like people are seeing value in this. It's needed in our community. We need culturally relevant access to personal finance education. And fast forward 5 years, I think it's been, we're here now.
Oh, 5 years. Time is flying.
Yes, it does. And I just think like it's so awesome that you guys met in college and you guys have grown together, your knowledge,
Yeah.
and it's so relatable and it's so needed in our community because there isn't a lot of us. I mean, if you really see, I mean, we were at FinCon, that's where we met. And
Hmm.
when you look at who was there and how many of us were Latinos, it was a small group if you really think about how many Latinos are in this country, right? It's a very, very small group of Latinos that are talking about money. And I feel like there's still so many more needed because of the quantity of people, Latinos, and we're going to be the majority very soon. And so,
Mm.
how many more Latinos do we need talking about money? We need many, many more. And so, one of the things that I get a lot is like how, you know, how the competition out there. Like, I've heard so many things, and I'm like, it's not about competition. It's more like about collaboration and it's about empowering one another because this journey to, and I think that's what I love about FinCon, that I was able to kind of relate to most of you in a lot of little ways, right? But primarily in the whole like finance, talking finance, everybody has their own like way of seeing and personal. And so, but everybody has their own like little philosophy or what worked for them and want to build wealth. And that's what I love, that everybody has their own toquecito of like what works for them. And I wanted to first talk about like how we met. And so in FinCon, I remember like we had a WhatsApp group with most of us in there. And then I saw a picture of you guys that you guys posted that you guys were in that first session. And I was like, okay, I know what they look like. So if I come across, I'll say hi. And I did. We were in one of the, what do you call it when
The round table.
where the sponsors were?
Yeah, the expo.
So we were in, and I was like, that's them. I saw them. That's the girls that were in the group chat. So I know they're the Latinas. So I went up to you guys, and when you guys said you guys were Latinas from Latinas Talk Dinero, I quickly assumed like, oh, you guys have a podcast? So one of the things that was interesting is that when we started talking about that, as other Latinos were kind of approaching you guys, it was like a very similar question.
It's always the question.
Yeah, we get that all the time.
Yeah, we really do.
So
I
it's
know.
Blue, you guys need to start a podcast.
Right? I know people are manifesting for us.
Yes. All right. So a couple of things when we were talking and discussing about like what we could talk about and what we can bring to the community, a few things that came up were breaking money taboos, Latina strength and resilience, and community and inspiration. So we're going to talk a little about that. So if you are interested in any of those things, stay tuned to the end because I'm going to be asking them questions about this, and we're just going to have a dialogue. So my very first question is, why do you think money has been such a taboo subject in our community? So whoever wants to go first.
I can jump in, and I'll try to be brief because I feel like I can go down the rabbit hole. First, I think every individual's experience is different. So everyone's answer to this question may look different. But in my experience, I think it's because my parents, grandparents, great-great-grandparents, they didn't grow up like in a economically stable home and broader family. So money was always a source of conflict, trauma, struggle. It was never something that was associated with positivity, except for we need more money so we can live a quote unquote better life. And that ultimately led to my parents leaving Mexico, coming to the US for a quote unquote a better life, for a quote unquote American dream, right? But again, back to your question, I think it's because for so long in our communities, it's been a concept that's tied to a negative connotation. And I want to point out that it's largely, in many cases, to no fault of our own. I think it's due to larger societal inequities, structural inequities that are in place. And I'll leave it there because I'm sure Raylene will add a lot more.
Yeah, I feel like we could sit here and talk to you, Mayra, for like 3 hours. And it still wouldn't be enough to divulge. So maybe, future conversations for sure. I agree with Ale 100% in that I think that the answers to this question, the reason it's taboo or like the context in which it's taboo is so different. I think for me, and I've shared this on our page as well in different moments, but for me, the lack of economic stability in my family was deeply interconnected and used as like a mechanism of control that led to violence. And so I think like we also have to understand that like I think the lack of and one, as I said, like education isn't enough. Like we can educate people till till we don't have any years left, and yet like there are, like as I said, like really systemic and deeply rooted problems of exploitation in the way that we treat our workers, in the way that we treat our people, in the way that we think about production. I think in the U.S. That doesn't allow for, I think, people to achieve economic stability in the ways that we thought it was, and also that like the context of when our parents came to this country, and my parents are for example, I'm the third generation in the U.S., and yet still my family couldn't achieve economic stability in the ways that we dream of, I think, when our parents come, our grandparents or great grandparents come to this country. And so I will say that I think a lot of it for me of like why it's taboo is because I think it's been, rather than treated or seen as a resource, a tool in which we can then engage in the life that we desire or dream of, it's used as a tool for control and exploitation of not only of like systems on our own families, but even within our own family. And I think when it comes to like intimate partner violence and like those kinds of things and relationship struggles, like I also think that actually no, we know like research, there's lots of research around how that's deeply intertwined with a lack of economic stability. And so, you know, in my outside of Latinas Talk Dinero, I do a lot of work around like essentially supporting and building like economic and like worker power within the organization and that I'm a part of. But I think they're both connected. And so I think money taboos are really like rooted in people's not lack of understanding, but also lack of another option of how to see money, how to treat money, how to use it as a tool, because it's been used as a tool against us. And so it's easier to be like, you know, money's not for me, rather than like dig deeper and like undo some of those learnings.
So when I was growing up, it was mala educación to talk about money. And that's why it became a taboo in my family, because we just didn't talk about it until I kind of forced my mom to talk about it at like age 4, where I was like, okay. So in my family, it was hard because my mom had money. My mom had a decent job. She was a nanny for a really rich family. But and she was probably at the higher end within like the East LA community of like pay for immigrant pay. But my mom just didn't have the organization piece down. So we would not pay the bills on time, but it wasn't because of the lack of money. It was just lack of organization. So when I forced my mom to kind of teach me how to write a check, that was the very first thing I asked her. I'm like, how do I write a check? Because if I can write a check and drop it off at the post, because we had a little mailbox right by the bus stop. So I was like, I will drop it off and just put a stamp on it and take and send it so that the power doesn't get turned off. And so like I have a whole story about like how the power got turned off. But that's what prompted me to like, okay, I know my mom has money because the power gets turned on the very next day. So it's the fact that my mom either forgets or she's just not organized. And so that's kind of like what started this like, okay, I know it's a taboo topic. I know it's mala educación. I know we're not supposed to talk about this, but there's a need here. Like there's definitely a need to do something different because what we're doing isn't working. But I didn't even know that concept at 14, right? I just kind of felt like I need to do.
To your point about it being mala educación, it was similar in my household. Like you just don't ask. But reflecting back on that, like they don't even explain why. It's just like you don't ask, right? So to this day, if you ask me like why, the answer is just, oh, it's mala educación. And I wouldn't be able to give you like the reasoning behind. But obviously we can deconstruct that, right? But it was the same.
It's the lack of context. I think that's hardest, like as you're growing up, because then you look back and you're like, what, like, but why? And like, what was going on? Or what were the things I wasn't seeing? And I also think there's this aspect of like, I think now as an adult, navigating the financial world, even with the means that we have in the Bay Area, right? Cost of living, etc. Like, I think about like how that must have felt, right? As like we help Latinas who are moving through many financial decisions and I think navigating that space or being an ear for people who are really don't know where to begin or are stressed, living paycheck to paycheck, etc. Like I think back to like how my mom would have felt in that moment or how my parents would have felt and like how much stress that caused. And then, you know, and we sit there, I think, as children and don't quite see that world. And I don't know, I think as an adult, you start to see differently of like, I think our families navigate the systems that we have with finesse, I think, and with all the tools at their disposal. But yeah, I don't know. Really recently, I've been reflecting a lot about like how that must have felt to also not have enough or to not know or to not talk about it and to hold all of that and like not have these spaces that we're creating for ourselves. I think that for me has been like an interesting reflection.
How did each of you start opening up about money, and what reactions did you get at first?
I think for me, two experiences come to mind.
Mm-hmm.
One with family and one with friends. With family, my parents, I remember when I started asking my parents about like how much money they had set up for retirement, and stuff like that. And I remember my mom said something along the lines of, "Why do you want to know how much money we have?" And then once I started like digging and unpacking it further and explaining to her why I wanted to know and why I was curious where they were storing that money, over time, she became more receptive to having those conversations. My dad is very like nonchalant, so he was just like, whatever your mom says, go with that. So it definitely took time. With my siblings, I definitely overwhelmed them at first. As I was learning content or like more skills, tools, knowledge, I would want them to do everything I was doing, like do this, do that, open that, open that. But that unraveled a whole different layer of questions. I'll talk about my experience with my friends similarly, where it was overwhelming, where I was telling them to do this, do that. And at a certain point, I had a friend who was like, "You're sharing too much with me. Like, I'm a little overwhelmed." And I think that's when I learned like
Yeah.
everybody learns at a different pace. And for me, I was at the point in my life where like it was important to me to focus on those things and realize that everybody's journey is very different. I think this connects to the point we were talking about earlier, where to some people, money is still a taboo topic, right? Even if
Mm-hmm.
you think about like the workplace. I'm all for asking people, like, so, hey, how much do you make? I make this much. Let's talk about it. Like, I want people to know how much I make. But there's others who I've kind of given them the space to share and they don't share. And I'm like, that's fine. Like, if you're not comfortable sharing, I'm not going to pry it out of you, right? But it's still very much a taboo topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I feel like there's this like awakening of like new information and then you just want to tell everyone. You're like, guys, I like learned this new thing. I gotta like I you have to do it this way. Like here's my thoughts and like I want to dive in. Can I see your account? Like let's do it together. Like I also jump on a like share screen. Like I feel like I was like really like motivated to like fix everything and to like quote unquote save everything, which is so problematic. Like save everyone and fix everyone and all the things, right? And then I think I had to like return to my like to that same sentiment of just like really I think meeting people where they were at. In fact, like I think with my mom, it was never it actually wasn't an issue at all. Like I mean, I don't know if this is like an eldest Latina thing or like a first gen like daughter thing or what like those kinds of sentiments, but I think like my family really trusts me. And I think like I take that as like a big responsibility and like an honor that they trust me. And God forbid I say like, oh, I would like to be a lawyer. And then my mom's like sending me lawyer questions and like, you know, like I feel like there's this like really deep sense of trust and like even for elections, right? Like that's a conversation and like my family will call me and like we'll talk about it and my siblings the same way. And that's an honor. And also like I think with my mom, it wasn't really an issue. Like I think she actually like, I mean, due to her own situation, I think had and has like a lot of debt that really is like has been really hard to navigate due to like DV and stuff like that and control with money and such. Um, and so I think like also holding space for her and like us figuring that out together, like pulling her credit report for the first time together and like really sitting with the feeling that I knew was going to come up and like the healing that happens when you navigate like other people making decisions for you and then having to navigate the consequences. And so for me and my mom, I think it was different, but my mom and I also like grew up together in a sense. So, but with friends, actually, I found that in college it was fine. Like I think everybody was like trying to figure it out too, and so we were all like sharing a lot. But it's been interesting as an adult, more as an adult, I guess, or like later in life of like now having conversations with friends and it actually being like something people like certain people who are not within my like Latina space or haven't known me through this journey of Latinas Talk Dinero and so on, where it's actually caused conflict and like you know, I told that this, but like where I've been like where me and like my partner have been called like the things feel transactional when all it was like talking through a high yield savings account or something like that or like credit card points, which I'm obsessed with and I know. But nonetheless, so like it's those things where I think like really everybody's different. And I think people who know me know I enjoy this stuff. I also fundraise in my full-time job. So money is like a conversation no matter what, whether it's fundraising for my org or it's like financial education or it's like worker power, like all the things are interconnected for me. And so it's very much my like life mission, passion, like purpose. And so, but I think it's been hard to like hear that from folks, like this idea of transactional, when in reality, like I think they're working through things and I have to like also meet them where they're at so that they can feel comfortable. And so yeah, so I think those are some ways that it's shown up. But I actually think it's been like a varied experience depending on where people are and where I am in my own life.
So when I started talking about money, it was back in 2010, and I was learning how to budget. I was learning how to manage stuff. I had debt and a house I couldn't afford, and it was a mess. And when I first started, I remember telling my mom, like, hey, like I started budgeting, tengo un presupuesto, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And as the time went by, and I would have like conversations with her about things or wanted to buy something, and I'm like, oh, that's not in my budget right now. And I'd use phrases like that. She would say
Mhm.
something like, tú y tu presupuesto tan agarrado. And I'd be like, oh my God, like she doesn't see it the way I see it. Like that's when I knew that I realized that some people see budgeting and presupuestos as a negative thing, like a negative that have a negative connotation behind it. It feels
Mhm.
restrictive, it feels hard, it feels like, why would you do that? And
Mhm.
that was my mom's perspective of like, and you have to remember, my mom was super disorganized. So, like, I thought that this was going to try to maybe motivate her to get her act together. And it really didn't. It was actually, it pushed her away, like, oh, esto no entiende.
Mhm.
And it's like, that's not the case, or
Mhm.
that's all things. But at the same time, I'm glad that that didn't stop me,
Mhm.
because very much a people pleaser then, like a lot more than I am now. I mean, I still struggle with it, but it's very like I'm so glad that that did not stop me. My dad, on the other hand, my dad has very high scarcity mindset. Where
Mhm.
everything, like siempre algo va a pasar, like you have to save for a rainy day, like you cannot just like enjoy. Like
Mhm.
he had trouble enjoying things. So for him, it was more of like, que bueno, mija, that you're gonna get out of debt. Like, que bueno, mija, que se están organizando. Like, it was always in a positive, but it was with the scarcity behind it of like, tienes que gastar. And so then in 2024, we did a trip every single month, which we planned for. And it was a big deal for us because we were hardly traveled. So for us, we wanted to travel once a month. And so for him, he was like, ¿van a estar bien? ¿Cómo le hacen? And it was like very, so like it was a very different response from each of my parents.
Mhm.
And that's what I kind of wanted to like share. Like everybody has the different like, responses, but it's, if you like talking about money, you shouldn't be scared to talk about it. And some people are going to be okay with it, and some people are
Mhm.
going to not be okay with it and are just going to bring maybe their own fears, and it's
Mhm.
up. And that's, like how I kind of perceive it now after almost 15 years of, kind of
Yeah.
self-organized.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the experiences we all just shared speak to the point we touched on in the beginning, which is that personal finance is not like a one size fits all. There's
Mm-mm.
not a single solution that there's not a magic pill that if you give to someone and say, swallow this magic pill, all your personal finance problems will be solved, right? Every experience is so different. Um, and as you were talking about your parents, one thing that came to mind that I want to highlight is that for a lot of us, our parents, although they didn't necessarily have the words or language that the personal finance space is using now, like
Mhm.
save and budgeting, a lot of our parents already did that in different ways. They just didn't call it that. So they already had that foundational knowledge that we're now entering, right, this personal finance space and using the quote unquote correct terminology. So I just wanted to highlight that because something that Raylene and I really are try to emphasize is that the knowledge that we're bringing to the table isn't always new, but
Mm-hmm.
rather knowledge that we've learned from our parents, our ancestors, our families, etc.
Mm-hmm.
That's true because they have. I mean, they've navigated, 20 plus years probably before we were, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not because my mom was really young. They had my, but like still, like they're
Yeah.
young adults having to navigate, life then. I'm sure it was hard too, and they had to figure it out, and they did.
Mm-hmm. I mean, who budgets better than like a single mom or a family who's like navigating one paycheck? Like, I think we also like get it to the point about what Ale said earlier. I think one of the rhetorics that was really like pet peeves and like really friction, like a lot of friction for us, I think within the personal finance like education space was this idea that people like should be shamed for their financial situation, that people should be put down as like it's their fault for not knowing enough, their fault for not budgeting well enough and X, Y, and Z. And I find that like those who have the least means are often the best budgeters because they know exactly how much milk costs, exactly how much bread costs, because their life is penny to penny. And so like the rhetoric or the narrative around like that people it's their fault, like it's just so like it's just not nuanced enough and it's not contextualized enough. And it creates this dynamic where people see folks who are living in poverty as like less than, when the people who have wealth also have had, many of them, if you look into their histories, have had generations of folks figuring that out. And so I think for us it's like really really important to like honor and like stay rooted in like the context of how people move through this world, and like not shame them for that, because like there's already enough of that in the world to then add to that. And also like positive reinforcement and like supporting people and loving people and caring for people is just going to go a lot further, and build a lot bigger than I think shaming people into budgeting, and existing in this restrictive space that ultimately isn't sustainable.
That's true. Can you share a moment when resilience or community support really carried you through financially?
I can start, Ale, if that's okay. Um, Yeah, I think it's so interesting this experience that I'll share. I actually have only shared I think once maybe on a panel I did in person with some young like Latinas in the Bay. But it was interesting because it came up in this panel and I was like, oh, I guess I never shared it. And you know how sometimes you go through experiences and they're like too traumatic or like too like hard to think about or talk about or shameful until like years later when you're like, all right, like that actually was a moment of community and rather than a moment of like scarcity and fear and such. But the moment that comes to mind for me, and Ale knows this, because I think she was like in the mix, but I was graduating undergrad, and it was that weird moment where you're like, your summer job ends, you're like going to a new lease. And mind you, I had been a resident assistant, like an RA, for my college years. And so that was the way that I paid for, and I didn't have financial support from my family. So that was the way that I paid for like food and housing for myself. That was like, those things were connected. So when I graduated undergrad, that was the first time I had to even think about that I couldn't just like work my way into housing, if that makes sense, and had to think about what that would mean. And rent is expensive in the Bay Area. And as a student who was going from like minimum wage working on campus to like then getting my first job, there was like that middle point where I didn't quite have enough to meet both needs. And I remember that my check was going to be coming. Like I was good for it. Like I knew the check was coming, but it was like that delay. Cause you know how when you start a job, they don't pay you for like right away, etc. Which may not matter if like you have savings, but I didn't. And so I remember reaching out to like, I think it was like 10 or 14 people. I don't know. It was like some wild amount of my friends. And I literally told everybody like, I need this much to make rent. Here's like all of the things, like here's my plan to pay it back. Like I was very like I think methodical about it. Um and like I think like 7 or 10 people showed up for me. Some people gave me $50, some people gave me $300. Like it was like and I don't even know. I told them in the moment, but like I don't even know if those folks like know that like they were a difference in like me being housed or not. Like that's how serious those moments are. And it took a lot of courage for me to even ask, but I also think to have them show up and and some people couldn't. And that's okay. That was okay. And like we're still friends to this day. Like that wasn't an issue. But to have people be honest with me about what they could or couldn't give me, and then to allow me the time to pay it back. Like I had my little spreadsheet, you know, I made my way through. Like that for me, those moments meant everything. And so I would just say that like that community support was like a behind closed doors kind of support. But I think that's the type of change that can happen, or like resilience that can happen when we talk about money. Because if I hadn't felt comfortable enough to say anything and I suffered in silence and lost housing, and then what, right? So like I think there's like I think these conversations or talking about money allows us to ask for help when we need it. And I think for me,
Mhm.
I'm so grateful for that moment. I'm so grateful I have the friends that I do. Um, and from that moment on, that was like rock bottom for me. I was like, I will never have to be in that position again. And so, like, I think that for me, even as much, that was a community moment for me, and also a moment of like, I don't know, reflection, of like, I never want to be in that position again. So yeah, so I think that that was a moment that came up.
It's interesting that you shared that because what came up for me was also college. Um, for context, I started working at 14. Um, Cash job, obviously. So aside from like my parents paying for like our rent, food, any like extra activities or clothes, I was paying for myself since I was 14. So when I went to college, thankfully I was able to get a full ride, so my parents didn't have to pay anything when it came to tuition. So when it came to extracurriculars, I was still paying for my own stuff. And there was often times where I had like $2 in my bank account. And my parents would reach out and ask, like, hija, ¿cómo estás? ¿Necesitas algo? ¿Necesitas dinero? And even if I had $2, $1, I always acted like everything was fine. Like, oh, no, no, I'm fine. Like, I have enough money, because it had already been what, like 4 or 5 years that I never asked them for money.
Mm.
And to Raylene's point, like as college students, we were working what, 15, 20 hours a week, making minimum wage, barely had enough to survive. But the community moment that comes to mind is that there was a circle of like 3 or 4 friends that I knew I could always count on if I needed something, whether that be paying my cell phone, or paying, I didn't have a car at the time, but Raylene, your car comes to mind, right? Insurance or a carpet or something like that, right?